Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. Lazy Booking coming at you live with a special edition today, a Friday afternoon special edition, live here on A2D Radio.com. So hit the like, hit the subscribe, hit the follow, and we're going to intro this man when we come back.
Oh my God! I'm embarrassed! He's flying!
Welcome in. It's almost time.
Guys, we're very honored here today, live on A2D Radio, to welcome a special guest today. We're bringing in, I'm not even going to try to be you, man, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. We've been chatting for a while, and I'm happy to have you on. And we're going to have a lot of fun today. We're going to talk to Ken about his career. We're going to talk to him about the wrestling school he's got going on, some of the announcing work he's done. And, hey, you guys know it's sports here. We're going to ask him about Brett Favre and the Packers, too. So we want to first start off. We want to share some love with our sponsors. First, SpecializedPhysicalTherapy.com. Dr. Paul Vidal in Cherry Hill, Burlington, New Jersey. You can find him on the web, SpecializedPhysicalTherapy.com. No appointment necessary. So make sure you guys go check out the doc. Our topic of conversation we open up with always today, and that's brought to you by BOAGGIO'S Bread. Located in Mount Laurel, it's home of the best stuffed breads, tomato pie, sandwiches, cutlets, meatballs. Mwah. It's phenomenal food. Mention A2D Radio. You're going to get 10% off on your store purchases. So make sure you get that love from the fam with A2D. BOAGGIO'S Bread, I'm telling you, phenomenal. Hey, all right. Hey, we're pet lovers here. But Ken, again, thank you so much for taking the time today. I know you're a busy guy. You got to run your school and stuff later today. But we appreciate you giving us a little bit of your time today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to.
Yeah. So our BOAGGIO'S opening topic of conversation, WrestleMania is still the premier annual event in professional wrestling. Agree or disagree? Ken, I defer to you on this. Do you agree or disagree? You know, we have Wrestle Kingdom, we have Bound for Glory, we have AW now has whatever you consider, either double or nothing, or I don't know. They got two big events. But what would you say WrestleMania is still the premier and elite event in professional wrestling?
It is the event in professional wrestling. Like, there's just no comparison. Those other companies have their biggest shows of the year, but I don't think anything compares to the level of pageantry and just, hype around it. WWE is going to go into LA and take over the town for an entire week. It's the Super Bowl of wrestling. I mean, I know that's a overused comparison, but I think there's no other way to describe it.
It is kind of like a cliche way to describe it, but it's so spot on. I mean, I've never been to the Super Bowl, but I know I've been to the NFL draft when they had it here in Philly, and that was a whole big 3-4 day event that they did. Mm-hmm. And it kind of does have that kind of a vibe where there's events all week, there's meet and greets, they have WrestleCon, there's sub events outside of WWE, and you're right, it's just such a collection where everybody from every show, like we mentioned Bound for Glory, we mentioned NJPW, but a lot of them are showing up WrestleMania weekend trying to get the rub off of WWE's WrestleMania fan base. And you've been there, you've been a part of it. As far as WrestleMania goes, as a performer, talk about what the experience is like experiencing that as a performer.
It's just it's really hard to describe. It's just a very busy week. WWE does a great job of when they go into these towns for 4 or 5 days, they take over, and every day there's meet and greets. And I remember they used to have for SmackDown versus Raw, whatever year, the video game, they would have us, some of us meet at a bar or something like that, like a Planet Hollywood, and we would have a competition between each other, and they would actually have like brackets, and Shelton Benjamin was really good at video games and would win the competition every single year. But it's a lot of fun. And one of the other things too, that you'll notice, the matches are so much more, to be a WWE performer, you already have to be good. You have to be able to work on the fly. They're working, 4 or 5 days a week usually. It's the one time of year where the matches aren't put together on the day. Generally, matches, you get to Raw, they give you a script or they give you a rundown. Here's what you're doing tonight, and then you sit down with a producer and your opponent or opponents, and you put the match together. WrestleMania is one of the only ones where, like, for the week leading up to, you've got a 2-hour window where you meet with that producer and your opponent every day and just fine tune it and make sure that the match is just, like those meatballs.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine having what the adrenaline is like to be in front of a crowd of 50, 60,000 people, in a stadium. And, you had the ultimate experience. I mean, standing on top of a ladder where all eyes are on you. I can only imagine what that moment's like. So,
interestingly enough, and I've said this before, but it didn't seem that different when I was out there because I was so used to working in front of crowds. I remember coming out in that, we were at Ford Field, which holds, I don't know, there were 83,000 people or something like that in attendance. And I remember coming out and looking, and it just looked like a full arena, like a normal 10,000 or 20,000 seat arena. And we performed, and then I got showered up, and I went up into the luxury. They had a skybox for the families and friends. And it was then that I looked out onto this giant bowl, this sea of people with a tiny little ring in the middle of it. And I was like, oh my God. It was then that it dawned on me.
Yeah.
But I guess you just get so used to it. One of the crazier things about my career, for me in particular, is that there are things that I look back on now, like certain matches, working with HBK, working with Ric Flair, where at the time it was just work. What am I doing today? You're working Ric Flair. Okay, cool. It wasn't like, oh my God, I'm wrestling Ric Flair. Let's, it was sort of like a punch the clock. I got to the point where I was just punching the clock kind of, which is just crazy.
Yeah.
If I could go back and do one thing and redo one thing, it would be like, enjoy it,
Just kind of take it in a little bit more. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, your career, you have really worked with so many incredible performers, and I do want to dive into that. But first and foremost, Ken, talk about getting into professional wrestling. What, when you were a kid, were you a big fan, or was it something that you kind of decided later on? Talk about that whole conception of getting into professional wrestling.
I was not a fan growing up. There were brief moments in time where I would watch, right around the time where Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling cartoon was on the air.
Mm-hmm.
There was a Saturday morning show. There was Saturday night's main event. But I was never really crazy about it. I remember I would go to the grocery store with my mom, and I hated grocery shopping, but I would go and sit at the magazine rack. And I would usually read stuff like Mad Magazine and things like that. But there was always those wrestling magazines that were there, and they always had like Ric Flair or Dusty or Abby just covered in blood all over the front. And I never understood it. It didn't make sense to me. It was like 97. I was at a friend's house, and I used to give this friend a kind of a hard time about watching wrestling too. And for whatever reason, he just said like, hey, just watch, just shut up and watch. Right. And I remember sitting there and hearing the glass break, and I saw this bald-headed son of a bitch come driving to the ring in a pickup truck with the smoking skull on the front, and he had like a 6-pack of beer in his lap, and just the way that he carried himself, the way that he acted, I was like, okay, that guy's kind of cool. And And then I started watching week after week just to see. And my roommates at the time were huge wrestling fans, so they would watch, and I just joined in with them and just to see what Austin would do. And then I got sucked into, Undertaker and Kane and all these other storylines. And before I knew it, that's all I could think about. I mean, wrestling became really huge. It was on the cover. I believe TV Guide did covers at the time, and it was 4 different wrestlers. It was like The Rock, Austin, Mankind, and Chris Jericho were on the covers of four different covers of TV Guide.
I remember. I think I had all of them.
Yeah, Austin did the milk mustache, got milk stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was just like, and all the guys that I worked with, that's all they would talk about. And I worked at a nuclear power plant, and I was in security, so we would just sit for 12 hours. We'd rotate. We'd sit in a box for an hour. Somebody would come and relieve us. We'd walk to another box. We'd sit there for an hour. And we had phones there, and we would call each other and talk. Did you see what happened on Monday Night Raw? And at the time, it was like there was only one show. So it was, I don't know. To me, it's still supply and demand, right? The less you have to supply somebody, the more they want it. And it was like we couldn't wait for Monday to roll around.
Yeah.
And I became just such a huge fan. And then I found out that you could go to wrestling school. I never even thought, it never dawned on me how do these guys do this stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Where do they learn it? And I was at a party one night, and a friend said, hey, there's wrestling schools you can go to. So I went home and I looked up wrestling schools. I found one in Chicago. And this was long before Mick Foley's book came out or anything like that. And I remember thinking, if I need to, because Chicago was about 3.5 hours away from me at the time, mm-hmm. I'll drive there on the weekends that I'm off. I'll go to the wrestling school. I'll sleep in my car if I need to, and then come back. And luckily, there was a wrestling school starting up in Green Bay, and I was their very first student. This guy that I called put me in touch with Mike Mercury, who was starting up a wrestling school in Green Bay. So I went there, and I remember I walked into this little dingy, dimly lit room, and I saw this. It was a 16-foot ring with kind of saggy ropes, and there were tears and rips and blood stains and duct tape all over the ring. And I just remember that, thinking that is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. And when I got into the ring, it was like, I don't know, something just, I felt like I'm home. This is what I want to do.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Sorry, it was a bit long-winded, but
oh no, that's okay. It's great. Listen, we love that, and it's so funny to hear your experience of kind of even just beforehand, because I feel like we all did that. Like, I did the same thing as you, where I hated the food shopping, but I would get hooked on reading Mad Magazine, Cracked, and WWF Magazine. I always perched up. My mom knew if she couldn't find me, I was perched up right by the magazine rack, looking at Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Like you said, it was just hearing you go through that and talking. It was bringing memories back for me too, to be honest with you. Very cool. And that was such a culture changing, not even just in pro wrestling, but culture was changing at that time in just such a way with the Attitude Era and things just kind of, getting a little bit edgier with things. And it was, Stone Cold Steve Austin to this day is one of the most probably beloved and recognizable celebrities, pro wrestling or not, that's out there.
Yeah. I remember at the time we had to do these. At one of the posts we would sit at there, you had to do a round. You had to go walk the perimeter of this little building, and they would watch you on camera while you did it, and you had to set off the alarms and make sure the alarms were going off. And I would do the BMF walk while I was walking around the, just like I wanted to be him. I remember my first match I went to was Over the Edge in Milwaukee. It was, I don't know if you recall this, but it was the one where Austin wrestled Dude Love.
Yes.
McMahon was the special, he was the referee. Yes. And the Stooges were the ring, the bell ringer and the timekeeper. And then Undertaker was the special enforcer or something like that. Ringside.
Yes.
You remember that?
I do remember that very vividly.
Very, very top row, last row. And I remember watching, And this was before I ever got into the business. And I remember thinking, how are they doing this? Because it seemed like they knew how to manipulate the crowd, how to get people to cheer and boo, and like, and they did it so effortlessly, but I knew that's what they were doing. I knew that they were and it was ring psychology. It was they were using a certain type of storytelling that we do in professional wrestling. And
yeah, and they were some of the best. And that, I think that's one of the great things about that era of wrestling. And I think it's what brought so many people in, right? Is there some things that I think now, if you look back on it, does it stand the test of time? Probably not. But when you talk about the main event picture and guys like Austin, guys like The Undertaker, guys like Mick Foley, who their character work and the ability to, just like you said, to understand a crowd and to be able to tug on those emotions and to also, on the fly, change a situation. When you look back at WrestleMania 18 and Rock and Hogan, right? Yeah. They talk about how that was a double turn, that everything was basically on the fly with how that went because it was unexpected. Just amazing how guys like that are. And, I think to your credit, you became somebody who was a very, very great or very, very talented in understanding the psychology of the ring and working a crowd. When do you feel like in your career that kind of started? Because again, your career, when we look at your career, and you've worked everywhere. You worked in WWE, you've worked in Impact, you've worked in the Indies. Your character has seemed to have, although it's kind of developed over time, you've kind of stayed true to the character and the way that whether you're a heel or you're a face, the way you use psychology in the ring with the crowd, it seems that people connect with your character.
Well, it's funny because I knew that the character stuff was the most important aspect or one of the biggest aspects of what we do right out of the gates. And so I always worked on promos and stuff like that. I would, if I was booked on a show, I would ask a promoter, is there any way I could cut a promo? If it was appropriate, I know that right. You can't just go out there and cut a promo every time. But I remember the day that it started clicking with me as to what my character was I had been dating this woman and I broke up with her, and I broke up with her. I didn't want to be with her. But then one of my close friends I started hearing they're hanging out, they're talking a lot. And I just remember thinking that goes against the code,
it does. Absolutely.
It just felt weird. And I remember I was at a friend's house. It was a bunch of wrestlers, right? At this point, I had started my training. I'd probably been in the business for 6-7 months. And I was talking to this guy on the phone, and there were 5 or 6 of my buddies in the living room, and they were just being quiet. They weren't saying anything, and they were laughing. They were clutching their stomachs and kind of rolling around, laughing at some of the stuff that I was saying to them, the way that I was talking to them. And when I finally hung up with them, my trainer, one of my trainers, Eric Plecken, Eric Hammers, he said, if you ever have a question as to what your character is, remember this day. That's your character right there. And so then it just kind of clicked that it's just me when I'm really pissed off, because I become really sarcastic and so that was kind of the little start. And then look, it took me six years of being on the indies before I got to WWE, before I got signed. So it was just, I remember Davari and ODB and Austin Aries and I, but particularly Davari and I, we were best buds, and we talked every day, we hung out every day, we worked out together, we rode together. If I got booked on a show that he wasn't on, I would ask the promoter, hey, I got a guy that can come with me, and usually get him on the show. And if he wasn't booked, he would just jump in the car with me and come anyways, and then usually actually get on the card because somebody would forget their gear or not show. So, but we just kept on like, what is WWE looking for? What do they want? What do we have to do to get there? And we just kept working on that. And I remember one time asking Dr. Tom Pritchard, like, what is it you guys are looking for? And he said, I don't know. He said, honestly, like, if we could bottle it and sell it, we would. But yeah. I don't know. But I know when I see it. I know when I'm looking and I see something and I'll go, that's it right there. Like, that's what I'm looking for right now. So it's just a matter of like, just honing your craft and working and trying different stuff. And sometimes the stuff doesn't work, and sometimes a little piece of it does work, and you can discard most of it and keep that one little element. But it's really just, you got to keep working at it and keep working at it.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously hard work pays off. You know, you talked about your 6 years in the Indies beforehand. Just kind of talk about that experience learning on the road. And you kind of touched on it a little bit working with, you know, Davari and some of the others, but just kind of traveling on the road in the indie scene. And, you know, were there any times beforehand, you know, I correct me if I'm wrong. I thought that there was a point where you were close to going to TNA before WWE. I could be wrong about that. But was there any points that you really thought like either it was coming and maybe you just need a little bit more work, or, you know, was it you knew that you were ready at that moment when it finally came for you?
Yeah, if you went back and you asked me 4 years in if I was ready, I would tell you yes. And then when it happened at the 6 year mark, I was so happy that it didn't happen at the 4 year mark, right?
Yeah.
Because I had learned so much more in that 2 years. You know, it was a matter of just hustling. Anytime I remember I would watch the WWE website, and they would always put up like maybe two or 3 months in advance, they would put up their calendar where they were going to be. And the minute I saw that they were anywhere near Wisconsin, I would reach out to, so my first experience getting booked as an extra for WWE, I had been in the business for like a little under a year. I think it was like 11 months. And I remember picking some people's brains that I knew that had been in business for a while, like, hey, you think I should send a tape? And they were like, no, you're not ready. Don't send a tape right now, because like if you send a tape now and you're not very good, then they'll just always remember that. And I just remember thinking, but if I send a tape now and it's the shits, can I swear out here, by the way?
Yes, you can. Absolutely, yeah.
See, if I send them a tape and it's the shits, and then they look at it and they give me a piece of advice, and then 6 months later when they see another tape and I've improved in that area,
yeah,
won't that mean something? And so I sent the tape anyways, and I'll never forget the very first tape that I sent to WWE, because I got their address out of one of those wrestling magazines, and I sent it, and Kevin Kelly called me back like within a week, and he said, hey, I got your tape, I liked it, I want to bring you in. We're doing Raw in Chicago and SmackDown in Green Bay or Milwaukee or vice versa. Mm-hmm. So I got booked as an extra, went down there, hung out all day, ate catering. I think I got changed and went and hung out by the ring, but I didn't actually get in the ring. And then that's it. You go home, but you got to like, your face is seen and you're there and you kind of experience what it's like, and you get rid of, I mean, I was so nervous there. I remember in catering, I'm standing in catering and I'm standing behind Steve Austin, like, who's my favorite wrestler of all time, you know? And yeah. And I'm trying to like not be a fan and maintain my composure. So that was like a big experience, and I just kept doing that. And then finally I saw that they were going to be in Cleveland and Detroit. And so I reached out to Kevin Kelly and I said, okay, can I come in for this? And he said yes. And then that's when I had my very first dark match. My very first, it was like Jacked or Metal. It wasn't Sunday Night Heat. It was like Jacked or Metal or something.
Yeah, like that. Yep, I remember those.
It was against S.A. Rios. And I just watched it with my students the other day. It's terrible. It's terrible. But it was a jumping off point, and I was able to just continuously modify and try to get better and better. So I don't know if what was your initial question? I'm sorry. I went down this big.
It was just, well, we were kind of around. It was just, was there a point where
where I
felt like you were close, or was it when you hit that? And I think you said it right away. You would have thought at year 4, but at 6, you were glad it was at year 4. Number 6 is kind of the magic number there.
I remember the day that I debuted. So I was at OVW for about 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
I really was kind of just hanging, floating in limbo. And I've said this before, like Jim Cornette didn't know what to use me. And it's not a knock against Jim Cornette or anything like that. I'm not salty about it. It's just like, I was just a guy. I was a guy with a decent look, and I was relatively good in the ring, but there's a lot of people like that.
Right.
What is it that sets me apart? And I didn't do a good enough job at that time to sell myself to Jim. So he was just kind of like giving me these random opportunities to give me a match here and there, but nothing I could really sink my teeth into. And then Jim got released from the company, and Paul Heyman came in, and Paul Heyman pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I just want to let you know that I've been a fan of yours since I met you. I met him as I was an extra at SmackDown like a couple years before, and he said, I'm going to do so much stuff with you on TV, on the OVW TV program, that they're going to have to notice you, and you'll get, before you know it, you'll be on the road." Yeah. And it was 5 weeks later, Tommy called me, and Tommy Dreamer he was in talent relations at the time, and he called me and said, "Hey, they want you to come to," it was Columbus, Ohio. And he said, "They want you to come there, and they just want to give you a dark match and see because I had started doing the announcing thing."
Yeah.
And I put that match together. It was just supposed to be like I wasn't getting much offense. Funaki was going over. He was winning the match. And I remember standing just outside of gorilla position doing push-ups, getting ready. I was like 5-10 minutes away from the match. And Dave Lagana, who was the head writer of SmackDown at the time, walked up and he goes, "There's been a change." And I immediately, in my head, I was like, "Oh,
yeah,
they got pulled. Okay, all right, cool, whatever." And he said, "We actually have to come up with a finish for you because you're going over."
Cool.
And he said, "This is no longer going to be a dark match. It's going to be televised on what was the Velocity?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be on Velocity." And he stuck out his hand and was like, "Welcome aboard."
Oh, wow.
And I went out into the ring, and it was at that point I was like, "I'm ready. I fucking belong here." And I just, when you're having matches, especially on that level, like there are times where you need to like take what's yours when it's there, but then you also need to like be giving to the other person.
Yeah.
And I felt like at that point I was where I needed to be. So.
Yeah. When you talk about, this is around the time that you do develop the character with the microphone work, which I mean, again, it's some of the best stuff. It's some of the most original stuff that we've ever seen. Talk about the conception of that idea of taking the mic, saying your name a second time after.
It's so stupid, really. Like if you really think about it, it's just crazy to me. But when I was in high school, I was doing announcing for basketball. And I would, at some point, somebody was like, "Hey, you should do the last name twice for our team." And, like the old school boxing announcers. And so I started doing that. And I remember I used to get opposing players would come over and be like, "I love the way that you announce, it's pretty cool." And I would do stuff like, from Two Rivers, because I'm from Two Rivers, Wisconsin. I'd do this big thing, 6'1", center, Jose Luis Garcia. And then I would say like, "And from Chilton, 6'1", Bob Evans." Totally throw away their name. And it was, it was just kind of a funny thing. And then I forgot about it. I completely forgot about it until I was at OVW. And one night, Paul said, "Tonight I want you to go out there and cut," I think it was Dean Hill was the guy who was doing the ring announcing. He goes, "Cut him off and run him down tell him he's a piece of trash, and then do your own ring introduction and make a big deal out of it, you know? And I just, while I was standing in the ring, because I had gone over everything in my head.
Yeah.
And then while I was in the ring, it just clicked to say my last name twice, like I had done all those years before. And I did it. And I believe that night I wrestled Brent Albright, and we had like a 35-minute match or a 30-minute match or something. It was a really long match because OVW TV was only an hour long.
Yeah.
And I came back through the curtain, and everybody was like, when you said your last name twice, that was fucking awesome. You know? And it's those moments where when the other wrestlers like something, it's probably going to work for the fans, because we're kind of cynical. You know, we see things that work and don't work. And when you see something that's going to work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that has continued on. I mean, and it's so funny to hear the high school story of that. And that actually gives us even more of a better appreciation for that you pull that from there. But you know, you talk about that time. So you develop this character, you're being brought up, you're on the main roster at this point. Talk about that early time, because you had quite a win streak to start out in WWE. You were becoming a top guy. You know, they strapped a rocket ship to you there for a while. Talk about that time.
It was nuts. And it was, I mean, I hit the ground running. It went from, God, when am I going to get pulled up? What am I going to do? When is this going to happen? To fucking 100 miles an hour. Oh my God. And I never complained a minute. I mean, I was like, I wasn't home much, and I loved it. You know, at the time I was doing, I believe SmackDown was doing house shows Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, or no, Saturday night, I think it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then Tuesday would be the taping. And then Wednesday was OVW TV. So I would have like one day off, and then I would go back on the road on Friday. Mm-hmm. And I loved every minute of it. You know, it was, so I would go out and do the loop, whatever that was. And then I would fly to Louisville, do OVW TV, and then fly to Green Bay and, you know, stay with my mom, because my dad was going through, he was battling cancer at the time. So I was going there on my days off. And then I would go back to Green Bay, fly out, do the next loop. It was just awesome. And I went from, you know, nobody knowing who I was to walking through airports, and anywhere I went, you know, people are like, "Oh, I watch wrestling." You know, it's funny how when you walk around, you see all these people, and you don't realize like how many people actually watch wrestling. But I definitely noticed it, and yeah, it was just a kind of a crazy experience. Lots of fun. Suddenly I was traveling the world, and within a few years I had been to like 20 different countries, and my passport was completely getting filled up, and
wow,
just a nuts experience really working there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the schedule was a grind, and like you said, though, you get the opportunity to work all over the world. What was that like, you know, doing that grind, but having those opportunities? Can you look back now and say, all right, maybe it was a lot? And you said it earlier, but, you know, when you look back now and you think about international alone, you know, is it a whirlwind?
It really is. But I wasn't complaining, and I never did, actually. Like that was one thing that never bothered me, was all the traveling and just the constant go. I think the way my brain works, it's like life for me is like, and especially working for WWE, it was like preparing for a test. The way we teach kids to prepare for tests, where they don't learn the information. You commit it to memory, you take the test, and then you dump it immediately, right? Like all that knowledge, all that information, you pretty much dump it all. And that's sort of the way that putting together a wrestling match was, because like you're just every day you're in a different town, you're sometimes working different people. So you commit that match to memory, and then you go out there and you do it, and then dump it, and it's on to the next town. Like I said, there's so many things that I don't remember. Like somebody will post something on this day, Mr. Kennedy defeated blah, 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 or was defeated by, and I'll have no recollection of the match.
Yeah.
Impact Wrestling posted today that I wrestled Matt Hardy on Impact in 2011. I literally have no recollection of that whatsoever.
Oh, wow. I mean, I would think, too, with all the traveling that you do, and like you said, I mean, you've worked in WWE, you've worked in Impact, you've worked with so many talents over such, within 3 decades at this point now, right? Because the early 2000s up until now into the 2020s, I imagine it's hard to keep track of every single moment. But is there any specific moments that do stand out to you? Like, particularly, let's say your WWE run first, because when I look at your career and I remember your United States title run, which was awesome. But to me, the feud to me that always stood out with your career was your Undertaker feud.
Yeah.
And having the first blood match, the last ride match. So is there anything particular that really does stand out to you? And also we'd like to hear what that was like for you to be able to have such a massively featured program with The Undertaker.
It's hard to nail down just one of them, but obviously the Undertaker stuff was just, I told you before that I kind of, I didn't understand the level, like we're working with Ric Flair or even Hunter, it's just a match, but I never got that way with Taker. Like every time I stood in the ring, and his entrance is like the longest entrance in the world, even on house shows. And I never got bored with it. I was never like, come on, man, let's fucking do this. It was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I can't believe I'm doing this. Was kind of like my mentality all the time. I always appreciated it. And I think that one of the things was like Undertaker was so good to me and so kind to me. And he really took me under his wing. I remember I had a match with Batista at the Great American Bash. And I think it was 2007. And I got busted open 2 different times during the match, like really bad. I was covered head to toe in blood. And Taker pulled me aside like at the next TV taping. He was like, hey, I saw what you did with Batista. And he goes, I think we can make some money together. And I'm going to approach Vince. I'm going to tell Vince. And I was just like, thank you. I really appreciate that. But I tried not to get excited about things until they actually happened, right? And then the next week he approached me and said, did you hear what we're doing? And I said, no. And he said, we're going to go into a program together and we're going to do 2, maybe 3 pay-per-views out of it. Wow. I was like, freaking awesome. And then it started right away. And I think at the time I was the U.S. champion, and they decided, like, if I'm going to be feuding with Undertaker, I don't need that championship. So then I dropped it to Chris Benoit, like right away. And then I went right into that feud with Taker. And I feel like I was married to him between him and Kane. And, Batista was in that mix, and MVP. I was married to Taker for like a year. Yeah, it was just awesome. I had so much fun, and working a lot of times main events with him, and then coming back and just sitting in the locker room, and we'd sometimes sit for hours in the locker room and just chat and bullshit. Yeah. And while especially on the overseas tours, everybody's on the bus, loaded up, showered up, ready to go to the next town. We've got like a 3-hour drive to get to the next town, and I was on Taker's time, so like we sit in the locker room and just chat and just learn from him. Sit under that learning tree. It's funny because like MVP and I would work, at this time we would work Taker on the show, and then they would do a main event dark match at the end of the night. So it would just be for the house, not recorded, right? Just to send the people home happy. So basically, MVP and I going out there acting like jackasses, and we were bump dummies for Kane and Taker. And they would oftentimes come up to us and say, like, hey, you got a main event dark match tonight. You got like 4 segments on the show and the main event dark match at the end of the night. And MVP and I we used to rock, paper, scissors to see who was going to take the tombstone and who was going to take the choke slam. Because one is way easier to take than the other one. Yeah, yeah. The tombstone doesn't hurt at all. Yeah. The choke slam is,
Oh, especially when Kane does it. It's there's a little extra height on that.
Yeah. So we would rock, paper, scissors to see like whose turn is it to take it.
Oh, I love that. That's hilarious. I mean, MVP's another guy. Look at, you guys were tied together for a while as well. You worked with him in Impact as well. And then you see what he's doing now in terms of being, it's interesting. Like, I don't know how much you follow the current WWE product, a little bit. But the Hurt Business to me was almost like a new version of Evolution, where I kind of wish they would have kept rolling with that, because having MVP be the guy who is on the mic and really kind of the speaker for guys like Bobby Lashley. Bobby Lashley, you worked with him everywhere. Mm-hmm. He's a monster in his own, but you see guys like Cedric Alexander working with a professional like Shelton Benjamin, and you just think to yourself, like, I feel like that. I hope they kind of renew that, maybe with an Omos, and then they have a couple other young guys they're looking at. But the work that he's doing now at this stage in his career is unbelievable.
Yeah, I do get to see the stuff that he does sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I was going to say maybe it's possible that they go back that route, because I did see, and I don't know if he was just goofing off or is this something that came down from the office, but he posted something. It was like a picture of the three guys, and
yeah,
it was like, kind of teasing a reunion. Those guys together. I don't know. It's just really great to see. And MVP is one of my favorite human beings in the world. And, we had so much fun working those guys and learning. And we were like the same. We were these green kids that just started with the company, and Taker and Kane and Benoit at the time. And, other guys like kind of like, hey man, like, here's what you need to do differently if you want to have any longevity in this business. So, yeah, cool to see that he's still successful, still doing it.
Yeah. It's almost like a full circle thing for him at this point. But I have to ask you about the were you going to be Vince McMahon's illegitimate son, or with Hornswoggle over here? What happened with all of that?
Yeah. Yes, I was. I remember the day Stephanie came to me and said, Vince has something for you. He's really excited about it. I want him to tell you. And Vince pitched me this whole thing. We're going to have this big reveal that I have an illegitimate son out there somewhere. We don't know who it is. And then we're going to have this big, long investigation, and then it's going to be revealed that you're my son. So we did all this stuff building up to. I remember doing a backstage segment with Vince where we were talking to each other, and then when I walked away, I did the Vince walk, and then he
I remember that.
Stuff like that, fun stuff. And then I got in trouble. So I remember I left SmackDown, right? So we taped SmackDown, and I went home. I flew home the next day. So I flew home on a Wednesday, and I got into my front door, and my phone, I got a text message from the office saying, hey, Vince needs to see you in his office this afternoon. Go back to the airport. We'll have your flight booked for you. And I remember thinking like, all right, here we fucking go.
Yeah.
And I went to the airport, and I flew to Stamford, and they picked me up in a town car, brought me to Titan Towers. And I get there, I get up to the office, and there's like 9 other people waiting in the office. And everybody's got kind of like we don't know why we're here, but I don't think it's good kind of mentality. And then I remember Edge went in first, and he came back out like 5 minutes later, and he kind of had his head down a little bit, and he goes, it's not, I can't tell you what it is, but it's not good. And he took off. And so I went in there like third, I think. And, it was the doctor that I had been working with that had prescribed me some performance enhancing supplements,
Mm-hmm.
had ordered them off of this internet website, and that went against the WWE wellness policy or something like that. And I remember, like, you know, he even said to me in the office, he was like, you can't order stuff on these websites. And I said, I didn't. I don't know that my doctor did. And he was just like, I'm sorry, my hands are tied. I have to do this. So he fined me $10,000 and gave me a 30-day suspension. And it just so happened to be that, like, the next week we were doing the reveal in Green Bay, and they had already narrowed it down to it was either me, Hornswoggle, or the Sandman. It was like a blonde-haired wrestler, and it was a male wrestler. So
Yeah.
So they ended up going with Hornswoggle, which I'm happy for him. Trust me, like, I'm not salty about it at all. It is what it is. Like, sometimes life throws some curveballs at you, and you just have to, like, you know, it is what it is.
Figure it out.
Fair.
Yeah. So you did come back briefly, and we're starting to kind of get around the time of where your tenure with WWE wraps up. Any final thoughts on the end of your WWE tenure before you moved on to Impact?
You know, like, I guess I feel like not super happy with the way that it ended, but I don't sit and think about it every day. Yeah. For years, honestly, looking back on it, I was really salty. I was really pissy, and I think it affected my work other places and my general attitude. And I wish that it hadn't. I wish I had taken ownership of and responsibility. You know, like, nobody got me fired from WWE. I got me fired from WWE for my behavior. Like I said, I got to that point where I was just punching the clock. And yeah, so I had just an absolute blast while I was there. I learned a ton, and I worked with some of the biggest names in the business, and I became friends with some of the biggest names in the business. But yeah, so I sort of feel like there's unfinished business there. Like, I should go back there and wrap up some loose ends. But
Do you think that opportunity could come about?
maybe I don't know. I don't know how I feel like maybe I'm persona non grata. You know, like, I don't know if, like, my attitude and what I did is forgivable at some point. So I guess if it ever is that way, then I'll go back. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fair. And listen, I mean, I would never say never, because we've seen that they have opened the door for a lot worse than that, believe.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry.
You never know.
Yeah. So you move on to Impact. You get to work in Impact, and you work with another whole group of different superstars. When you talk about Kurt Angle, you talk about, obviously, Bobby Lashley again there. You worked with Hogan and Sting, and Flair ends up back there. AJ Styles, all these phenomenal, pun unintended, but phenomenal talents in Impact that, you know, Samoa Joe, a lot of these guys now are kind of the guys who are the standard for a lot of people, who, you know, it took guys like yourselves, Kurt Angle, and all to go down there and give them those kind of matches where people say, oh, okay, I saw, you know, Mr. Anderson down there working with AJ Styles, and never saw him before, but they put on a hell of a match. So, you know, what was that experience like, working with some of the veterans that you grew up seeing, like the Hogans, but then seeing this whole new crop of young talent that ended up becoming the next wave?
Well, at the time, I never felt like they were young talent. I just felt like, for whatever reason, they hadn't gotten their shot yet. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like, Samoa Joe has probably been in the business longer than me. I just happened to get to WWE faster than he did. And same thing with AJ and all those guys too. Like, Christopher Daniels and Frankie Kazarian and Bobby Roode, Eric Young. You know, these guys are like, they get it. They were just awesome to work with. One of the things that was sort of different is like when I was at WWE, it seemed like I never felt this way, but people were kind of walking on eggshells all the time. They felt like any day now the office is going to call and fire me. And I just thought, for whatever reason, like I was like, I'm just going to do me, and I'm going to work hard. And, you know, if I just, at some point I didn't think that I would ever get fired. I was like, I'll be here forever. I'm good. Yeah. And, but I know that other people didn't feel that way. And when I got to TNA, it was like, nobody was like that. There was never an air of eggshells. It was just, we're all here. We're going to put on a good show. We're going to work hard and then go have fun afterwards. You know, that was just a great atmosphere. Awesome locker room to be around.
Yeah. When you go back and you look at that roster and that time, you know, I think, and it stands the test of time. You go back and look at some of the stuff from like 2008 to like 2012 from TNA, some of the best wrestling you can go out there and find. I mean, we talk about it. We have a couple wrestling shows on our platform, and one of the storylines and to me, it's I wish that they could find a way to almost recreate it in a way. Was the Aces and Eights storyline was amazing. You know, I almost thought WWE was maybe going to venture kind of that way when they recently did the story. I forget the name of the group, but they had Mustafa Ali was running the group of you know, a bunch of guys, Dijak and all them coming in. But anyway, talk about that time, that storyline. I mean, you talk about a slow burn with guys like yourselves kind of one by one kind of jumping in, and then the whole thing with Hulkster and Bully Ray, and then the ultimate reveal. It was just so well done storytelling wise.
It was just, I remember that was Eric's baby, Eric Bischoff. And I was sort of at this point where I think I had been injured for a little bit. I'd been off TV for a while. They weren't quite sure how to bring me back. And Eric just said, like, what do you think about joining this group, this Aces and Eights group? And I remember thinking at the time, like, me, a biker? And then I was like, I've always wanted to act, and I looked at this as like a challenge. Like, okay, let's do it. And he threw me into the group, and there were things along the way that I feel could have been done differently. Like, for instance, we were a biker group that never rode motorcycles. You know, like, and just some of that stuff. Some stuff was like hot shotted, and I say that, in the sense that if somebody wants to become a biker, they want to get into a biker group, they have to prospect, for like a year. They have to mop the floors and clean the toilets and do whatever, the guys that have been there for a while want them to do. And then they're patched in. But it was like, here for this group, hey, I want to be in this group. Come on, here's a cut. They just, so like just stuff like that. But I had a ton of fun, great group of guys. We actually hung out backstage and, after the shows and stuff, became friends. That was a ton of fun. And then the whole, the feud between Bully Ray and I, that's one of my favorite things that I've done. One of my favorite feuds that I've had in the business. I would say Taker, I'd say Batista, Matt Hardy, Bully Ray, and Kurt Angle were probably my top 5, in no particular order either. Right. But I loved working with him. We ended up having a casket match at the end. We were in Manchester, England, I think. And we had this casket. They gave us, I remember on the day they gave us this tiny little coffin. And I was supposed to put Bubba into it. And we looked at this thing and went, there's no way anybody's going in there. So we found somebody there who could build it. They built the coffin the day of, and they built it, and it measured perfectly, like shoulder to shoulder, and head to toe, his body fit perfectly into this casket. And I remember I mic checked him into it. So he had to stand there and go face down into that, and he hit perfectly. I don't think we could have done it again.
Yeah.
Tried. So yeah,
that was a great feud. It was, and I mean, two of the great talkers too. I mean, you guys playing off of the aces and eights thing too. You know, with that history there was so much for you guys to work with, and the match quality was unbelievable.
Thank you. He was great to work with. I remember being sort of sad when it was over.
Yeah. So you've kind of, you know, at this point now, you know, you've worked at TNA, you've worked at Impact, whatever you want to call it. You've worked at WWE. You're doing, you know, you've been back in the independents and stuff, but you're running the school.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing now, man. You're paying it forward, which is wonderful to hear about. Tell us about that experience now, working with the students. I see you post a lot of videos on your social as well.
Yeah. I remember I wanted to open a school within the first few years that I was in the business. I'm like, I want to do this one day. I want to have a school because I wanted to change the things that I didn't like about the business. And I wanted to like cut some of the corners. There was a lot of wasted movement that we all did in trying to get to WWE. And I wanted to be able to like kind of cut some of those corners. There was a lot of stuff that we just had to figure out on our own. Mm-hmm. And yeah, but I never, and then even when I was at TNA, I thought about opening up the school. But at the time I was like, I don't think I've had enough experience myself to be taken seriously. And then Davari finally pushed me in like 2016, and he was like, let's do this. And so we opened the school, and it was kind of loosely based on like the Performance Center where like you can get everything under one roof, like that was the goal anyways. Yeah. And I just like, we've been running it since 2016, and I never imagined how wonderful this part of my career would be. Like, I really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed training people. I enjoy seeing the light bulb go on. Like, somebody's just struggling. And then one day it clicks, and you can tell when that moment happens, and it's just, everything changes from there on out. It's sad to see some people come in and you think this guy or girl has a lot of potential, and for whatever reason they just don't stick it out long enough. Yeah. And they never get to that point, and they go away. But the ones who do are just, it's really cool. And it's cool to see them going out and getting booked internationally, or doing extra work for WWE or AEW or, Impact. So it's very, very rewarding.
Oh, I can imagine. And yeah, for anybody who is looking for a wrestling school, if you're in the Midwest area or really from anywhere and you want to pick up and go, it's a great guy to train with here and learn from. So how often are you getting into the ring now yourself, as far as, are you working indie shows? And
I took about roughly 2.5 years off, the whole time during the pandemic. I think I wrestled one match. I needed a break, and I'm just sort of ramping up again.
Yeah.
I've gotten back into decent shape, still working on it. It's a work in progress. Mm-hmm. But I've been taking a lot more bookings now, and I'm still training with the students in the ring myself. For the most part, I get in the ring with them myself. I don't sit there and show them, I don't take 100 bumps a night.
Yeah.
But I will if I need to. And my wife is always like, oh, what are you doing? Like, have somebody else do it, because then I hobble around the house for the next day. Body's not as young as it used to be.
Yeah.
So
we got to get you out here in Philly.
We're training 4 days a week. We train Mondays and Wednesdays. We have a beginner class where we go over just basic stuff, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays we run like an advanced class. We usually pair people up, and they have matches, and then we tape those matches. I'm furiously writing notes as the match is going on, every little thing that I see, whether it was good or bad, and then we critique afterwards. I go around the room and I like invite the other wrestlers, trainees to, I think you have an opinion and your opinion matters, and just because you haven't been to WWE doesn't mean that you can't notice something that is wrong or good. So we do that. Also, if anybody wants to, generally those Tuesdays and Thursdays, we run those on Instagram Live. So, and we're thinking about adding them to Twitch and getting a commentator, little stuff like that.
Oh, that's a wonderful idea. Yeah. So I mean, anybody who's out there trying to get out there, check it out. Check out Ken's school.
Yep.
Go ahead.
If I could give you we have a website,
yes.
And we also have there's a phone number that you can call or text, preferably text, but if you need to call, that's fine too. But the number is 507-722-2776. And our website is the Academy, SOPW, as in School of Professional Wrestling. So
love that. .com, right?
.com. Yeah.
Beautiful. No, yeah, you guys, make sure you guys are checking that out. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I know you got a busy day. I have to ask 2 quick questions here.
Yep.
You're a football fan. You're a Packers fan. Are you a basketball fan? Are you a Bucks fan?
Not really.
Okay, that's fine then. One question then. Listen, the Packers are in the news big time now. It's a change of a guard, change of an era. Aaron Rodgers is out. Jordan Love is in. What's the vibe from Packers Nation right now with the changing of the guard here?
I personally like it. I have felt like Aaron Rodgers wasn't a good fit for like 6 years now. I respect the hell out of him. He's fantastic. He's a great athlete. But I feel like when everything was made public between him and the old coach, Mike
McCarthy,
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't like each other. And it was very clear on the field. You could see like they don't like each other.
Yeah.
There's no respect there. And I feel like the coach should like at least pretend to respect your coach in front of the other players and in front of the fans. Once you get whatever you do behind closed doors is your business. Like handle it there, but pretend like the coach, like it means something,
Yeah.
And I just kind of like, you hear those stories of like people having horror stories where he would chew them out for missing a route or something like that. And it wasn't, there's a difference between constructive criticism and just being an asshole.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like he was just an asshole. And I remember also feeling for at least the last couple of years, like when I used to watch Jay Cutler
Mm-hmm.
and the Bears, he would like go in for a set and then he would go back to the bench and he would sit there and pout and nobody would talk to him. He wouldn't talk to anybody. And I felt like Aaron Rodgers got to be that way too. So I've been ready for like 6 years. So I'm kind of happy about it.
Yeah. I think it's, and so he was probably right around the time you're mentioning, because I think I mentioned this on our show the other day, or maybe it was another, but up until about 6 or 7 years ago, he was my favorite player. We're Eagles country, right? So not on the Philadelphia Eagles, he was my favorite player to watch. I could not root for him if he wasn't playing the Eagles. And man, you talk about a guy that has just become so unlikable.
Yeah.
And the way he's carried, like I even watching him on the Pat McAfee show the other day where he's kind of like, it was almost passive aggressive. He's like, oh, there's no hard feelings, but he's like the only person in the world that was surprised that the Packers wanted to move on at this point. He's like, well, they wouldn't tell me. They never told me. They told people in the media. Just very bizarre behavior.
Yeah.
I think you guys are going to be in a better place. It's going to be a rough couple of years, but I think the Packers are definitely better off moving. I think Jets fans are excited now, but you don't know what you're getting or if he's even going to want to play a year from now. So
it's a team effort at the end of the day. It requires everybody working together, and if one person thinks they're above everybody else, for as good as his statistics have been, for as long as they've been, it hasn't done us any good.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of my take on it.
We appreciate you sharing that. We always have to get a sports take on here. It's it's a sports station, but Listen, Ken, we want to thank you for your time. Appreciate you coming on. This was me and you chatted almost feels like a year at this point. We were kind of back and forth, but we're so happy to finally have you on. And continued success with everything that you have going on with your school. And if you're going to get back in the ring, man, I hope you do. And I hope you come out here to Philly and do a show over here at the 2300 Arena for us.
Yeah, definitely. All right.
So thank you, Ken. Thank you, Ralph, on the back end. Thank you to everybody who watched, took the time to come out here and check out our conversation with Mr. Ken Anderson. And thank you to our sponsor, Specialized Physical Therapy. Thank you to BOAGGIO'S. Make sure you guys use that promo code A2D. Get your 10% off. And again, Ralph Del Vecchio on the backside. Thank you, brother. Appreciate you. So everybody have a happy, safe, smart decision. St. Patty's Day. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you soon.